10 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, the heavy oak door of the bridal suite clicked shut. I was standing in front of a massive floor-to-ceiling mirror, running my hands over the intricate lace bodice of my wedding dress. It was the kind of dress you dream about when you are a little girl, before the world teaches you how complicated love can actually be. Outside the frosted glass windows, out in the sprawling botanical gardens of the estate, 200 of our closest friends and family members were taking their seats. I could hear the faint, elegant hum of a string quartet warming up, the soft chatter of guests enjoying the crisp 72-degree weather, and the gentle clinking of champagne glasses. Everything was absolutely perfect. The man I loved more than anything in this world was waiting for me at the altar. I had spent a year planning every single detail of this day to ensure it was a flawless celebration of our future. But the moment that heavy door clicked shut and the lock turned, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. I looked at the reflection in the mirror and saw my parents standing behind me. Alistair, my father, immediately moved to stand squarely in front of the door. He crossed his arms over his chest like a bouncer at a cheap downtown nightclub, his face completely devoid of any emotion. Corinne, my mother, took a slow, calculated step toward me. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown, one that I had paid for out of my own pocket just 3 weeks prior because she claimed she had nothing suitable to wear to her eldest daughter's wedding. She did not look like a mother about to give her daughter away to the man of her dreams. She looked like a predator that had finally cornered its prey after a very long hunt. I turned around slowly, the heavy silk of my long train rustling aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. "Give your sister your $2 million mansion," my mother said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the quiet, tense air of the bridal suite like a serrated knife. She did not ask me if I would consider it. She did not suggest it as a favor. She demanded it with the exact same casual, unbothered entitlement she would use to order a black coffee at a diner. I stared at her, my brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of the words that had just left her mouth. For a brief, hysterical second, the absolute absurdity of the situation almost made me laugh out loud. I thought it was some kind of sick, twisted pre-wedding joke. But there was absolutely no humor in her cold eyes. There was only that familiar, ruthless calculation. "She needs it more than you do," she continued, taking another slow step closer to me until I could smell the expensive perfume she bathed in. "She has always been the pretty one. She is the one who deserves a beautiful, comfortable life without all the stress. You are just the family wallet. You know how to work like a dog and make money, but she actually knows how to live. It is only fair that you give her this house. You owe it to this family after everything we have done to put up with your cold personality all these years." The words hit me so hard they knocked the wind completely out of my lungs. The family wallet. There it was. The ugly, unfiltered truth spoken out loud for the very first time. 34 years of my life, 34 years of exhausting myself, of trying to earn their love, their approval, their basic human decency, boiled down to 3 miserable words. I was not a daughter to them. I was never a daughter. I was an ATM machine that they had finally decided to smash open and empty out completely. I looked frantically over at my father, expecting him to finally step in. I expected him to tell her she was taking her favoritism way too far, especially today, on my wedding day. But Alistair just shifted his weight, his face an impenetrable mask of stone, tacitly supporting every single word she said. "Refuse," my mother smirked, her lips curling into a nasty, venomous smile that made my stomach turn, "and we will walk out those doors right now and tell everyone you stole from us. We will tell your new husband, your wealthy new in-laws, your high-end real estate clients, and every single guest sitting on that lawn that you embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from our family business. We will ruin your reputation and your life before you even get the chance to say your vows." I felt a hot, blinding wave of anger rush through my veins. It was the kind of primal rage that makes your vision go blurry at the edges, the kind that makes your hands shake uncontrollably and your ears ring with white noise. If you have ever been the scapegoat of your toxic family, if you have ever been the invisible workhorse who bleeds themselves dry just to keep everyone else afloat, only to be spit on, degraded, and called selfish, then you know exactly the kind of deep, dark anger I am talking about. Drop a comment below if you have ever felt that specific kind of pain, because it is an incredibly lonely place to be, and nobody should have to feel that way. But I did not scream. I did not cry, ruining my carefully applied makeup. I did not fall to my knees in my expensive dress and beg them to spare my reputation. I have spent my entire adult life surviving in the cutthroat commercial real estate business. I buy massive properties that are completely falling apart, and I turn them into highly profitable empires. In my line of work, you learn very quickly that power does not belong to the person who yells the loudest or cries the hardest. Power belongs to the person whose name is on the paper. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the blinding anger to settle into a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. I reached down and slowly pulled off my delicate lace gloves, tossing them carelessly onto the vanity table. I looked my mother dead in the eye, and without a single tremor in my voice, I calmly said, "Go ahead." Her smirk faltered. Just a fraction of an inch, just for a millisecond, but I saw it. She had not expected that response. She expected the scared, desperate little girl who always caved under pressure, who always quietly paid the bill to keep the peace and avoid a public scene. To understand exactly why I could stand in my wedding dress 10 minutes before my ceremony and invite my own public destruction without blinking an eye, you have to go back. You have to go back 10 years, to the exact day I learned the true, devastating price of my family's love and the terrible realization of who they truly were behind closed doors. I was exactly 24 years old when I learned my very first real lesson about the twisted mechanics of my family. My sister, Tamsin, is 3 years younger than me. If you put our childhoods on a projector screen and played them side by side, you would swear on your life that we were raised in two entirely different dimensions by two completely different sets of parents. In our house, roles were assigned incredibly early, and they were permanent. I was the capable one. I was the one who could take a hit. Tamsin was the fragile one. She was the one who needed to be protected from the world at all costs. When I was in high school and brought home a flawless report card with straight-A grades, my parents barely glanced at it. They just nodded and told me to go set the table for dinner and take out the trash. When Tamsin managed to score a simple passing grade in basic biology, Corinne baked a massive chocolate cake and Alastair drove her to the mall to buy her a brand new phone. I was completely expected to navigate the harsh realities of the world entirely on my own, to absorb all the shocks, handle the heavy lifting, and solve my own problems without ever making a sound. Tamsin, on the other hand, was the undisputed golden child. She was the center of gravity in our household. Whenever she encountered even a minor inconvenience, the entire family structure violently bent over backward to remove the obstacle for her. By the time I turned 24, I was exhausted. I was working 3 separate jobs just to keep my head above water and save for my future. I was a receptionist at a mid-sized real estate brokerage during the day, dealing with demanding clients. I was a bartender at a loud, sticky sports bar at night, dealing with drunks until 2 in the morning. And on weekends, I sat at my father's cramped office desk, helping him sort out the disastrously messy bookkeeping for his small logistics company. I barely slept more than 4 hours a night. I ate cheap instant noodles sitting in the driver's seat of my beat-up sedan between shifts. I smelled like cheap coffee, stale beer, and printer ink constantly. But I did it all because I had a massive goal. I was aggressively saving up to buy my very first investment property. It was a small, ugly, rundown duplex on the very edge of town that absolutely nobody else wanted, but I saw the potential. After years of relentless, bone-crushing grinding, I finally did it. I had exactly $40,000 sitting in a joint savings account that my parents had set up for me when I was a teenager. I was so incredibly proud of myself. I honestly thought they would be proud of me, too. I remember sitting at the worn-out kitchen table on a Sunday morning, sliding the printed bank statement across the wood, my hands visibly trembling with pure excitement. "I am going to put the down payment on the duplex tomorrow morning," I told them, grinning from ear to ear, feeling like I had finally conquered the world. My mother looked down at the statement. She looked at the bold number printed at the bottom. Then, she slowly looked up at my father. They did not smile. They did not say congratulations. The air in the kitchen instantly grew heavy. Instead of celebrating, Corinne reached across the table and placed her perfectly manicured hand heavily over mine. "Marlo, sweetheart," she said. She was using that soft, dangerously gentle tone she always used right before she was about to take something precious away from me. "We really need to talk about your sister." Tamsin was 21 at the time. She had already dropped out of 2 different expensive colleges because the professors were, according to her dramatic complaints, way too demanding and did not understand her creative spirit. Her latest, most expensive obsession was becoming a high-end fashion designer. She had 0 formal training, 0 business sense, and absolutely no work ethic to speak of. But she had somehow managed to convince my parents that she was the next big visionary in the global fashion industry. "She has a vision, Marlo," my father chimed in, leaning his heavy frame onto the table, staring me down. "She desperately needs startup capital for her new clothing line. We're stretched incredibly thin with the logistics business right now. We need you to transfer that $40,000 to her account today. It is an investment in the family. We all have to sacrifice." I stared at them, the pure excitement draining out of my body so incredibly fast I felt physically dizzy. I thought they were joking. "But that is my money," I stammered, pulling my hand away from my mother's grip. "I worked for years for that money. I worked double night shifts. I skipped meals. I need it for the duplex. The seller is expecting the wire transfer tomorrow." My mother's face instantly hardened, the soft, gentle mask completely slipping away to reveal the coldness underneath. "You are always so incredibly selfish, Marlo. You are already doing fine. You are tough. You can easily just save up again. Tamsin is highly sensitive. She has a fragile dream, and she needs our complete support to make it happen. Are you really going to let your own flesh and blood sister fail just so you can buy some disgusting, rat-infested old building? Family helps family." They relentlessly tag-teamed me for 3 agonizing hours. They used every psychological weapon in their arsenal. Guilt, shame, emotional manipulation, and threats of alienating me from the family. They painted me as a greedy, heartless monster until I was sobbing uncontrollably at the kitchen table, genuinely feeling like a terrible person for wanting to keep the money I had literally bled for. In the end, they wore me down. They always wore me down. My spirit broke. I logged into my banking app and transferred the $40,000 to Tamsin's account the very next morning. I told myself it was fine. I tried to swallow the bitter pill. I told myself it was just money, and because I was a hard worker, I could eventually make it back. But deep down, I knew it was not just money. It was my time, my lack of sleep, my youth, and my sanity, handed over on a silver platter to someone who did not even bother to send me a text message to say thank you. Tamsin's fashion line was a spectacular, catastrophic failure, exactly as anyone with a brain would have predicted. She blew through the entire $40,000 in less than 6 months. Did she buy quality fabric? Did she hire a professional manufacturer? Did she run marketing campaigns? No. She used my blood money to rent a lavish, absurdly overpriced downtown studio space that she absolutely did not need. She bought herself a massive closet full of authentic designer bags and shoes to look the part of a successful CEO. And finally, she hosted a massive, catered launch party that I was not even invited to. When I asked why I wasn't on the guest list, she casually told our mother that my cheap, thrift store clothes would ruin the high-class aesthetic of her brand's image. When the money inevitably ran out and the business completely collapsed without a single garment ever being produced or sold, there were absolutely no consequences for her. None. My parents rushed in to comfort her, holding her as she cried fake tears, telling her the market just wasn't ready for her unique genius. Nobody ever mentioned the $40,000 again. If I ever dared to bring it up, even casually, I was immediately shut down, scolded, and called petty for holding a grudge against my grieving, depressed sister. That was the exact day the invisible ledger in my head snapped shut for good. I realized with absolute clarity that to them, my successes and my hard-earned resources were communal property, but my struggles and my pain were entirely my own. Tamsin's failures were treated as unavoidable family tragedies that required a massive bailout, while her ridiculous desires were treated as absolute, undeniable necessities. I quietly drove to a different bank the following week and opened a brand new account, one with only my name on it. I never told them how much money I was making ever again. I stopped working on my father's books, citing a busy schedule. I threw myself completely into real estate. I got my license, I started making aggressive deals, and slowly, quietly, I built my own life far away from their grasping hands. I thought distance and strict financial independence would protect me. I truly thought that if I just did not ask them for anything, they could not take anything from me ever again. That was my first major lesson. But the second lesson, the one involving the Oakwood estate, was the one that almost destroyed me entirely. Fast forward to 3 years ago. I was 31 years old, and I had done very well for myself. I was no longer the exhausted, desperate girl sleeping in her car and eating instant noodles. I had become a highly respected, successful property developer in the city. And much more importantly than the money, I had finally found Beckett. Beckett is an architect, and he is the exact opposite of everything I grew up with. He is steady, incredibly grounded, rational, and fiercely protective of the people he loves. When we first started dating and I finally opened up and told him the dark truth about my family dynamic, he didn't try to play devil's advocate. He didn't tell me that I must be exaggerating or that they meant well. He just pulled me into a tight hug, held me, and said, "They are completely wrong about you." He was the very first person in my entire life who saw me not as a financial resource or a problem solver, but as a human being worthy of respect. Together, combining my real estate knowledge and his architectural brilliance, Beckett and I found the Oakwood estate. It was an absolute, unmitigated disaster when we bought it. It was a massive, rotting, abandoned property sitting on 3 acres of overgrown, wild land. The massive roof was actively caving in, the plumbing system was completely shot, the windows were shattered, and families of raccoons were literally living in the grand living room. Everybody else in the market saw a hopeless teardown. We saw a hidden masterpiece just waiting to be brought back to life. We poured our entire life savings, every single one of our weekends, and our literal blood, sweat, and tears into that house for 2 solid years. We knocked down rotten walls ourselves. We spent nights on our hands and knees restoring the original, historical hardwood floors. We designed and built a breathtaking custom kitchen from scratch. By the time we were finally finished, the property was no longer a ruin. It was a stunning, modern mansion officially valued at over $2 million. It was our pride and joy, the physical manifestation of everything we had built together, a safe haven we had created from the ground up. Of course, the exact moment the house was finished and the landscaping was perfected, my family suddenly wanted to be deeply involved in my life again. For years, my parents had treated my career with a sort of polite, distant dismissiveness. But when they saw the professional photos of the Oakwood estate, their attitude shifted overnight. Suddenly, my mother was calling me every single day just to check in. My father wanted to come over on weekends and inspect the grounds, acting like a proud patriarch. And Tamsin, who had barely spoken 2 words to me in years unless she needed a favor, started showing up unannounced with iced coffees, acting like we were best friends. It started incredibly small, a classic manipulation tactic. My parents called one evening, sounding stressed. They claimed their neighborhood was having major issues with the underground water lines, and that their water would be shut off for weeks. They asked if they could just stay in our spacious guest wing for a few days while it was sorted out. I hesitated, my stomach tightening with anxiety. But Beckett, being the incredibly kind and accommodating man he is, squeezed my hand and said we had plenty of room and it was the right thing to do. They moved in. And then, like a parasite following its host, Tamsin followed immediately. She showed up with 6 suitcases, crying that her apartment lease was up unexpectedly, and she just needed a few days to find a new luxury place. A few days quickly turned into a week. A week turned into a month. A month turned into 3 agonizing months. Before I even fully realized what was happening, my peaceful, $2 million sanctuary had been completely hijacked by the people I spent years trying to escape. Tamsin took over the primary guest suite, which was significantly bigger and nicer than her entire old apartment. She immediately began treating the house like a five-star luxury hotel where the staff was completely invisible and everything was free. I would come home utterly exhausted after a 14-hour workday on a construction site, only to find her throwing lavish, loud pool parties for her unemployed friends. They would track mud through the foyer, leave soaking wet towels draped over the expensive imported velvet furniture, and shamelessly drink the expensive vintage wine Beckett had bought specifically for our anniversary. When I finally lost my temper and hired a professional cleaning crew to deal with the disgusting mess she refused to clean, I walked in and caught Tamsin snapping her fingers at the maids. She was barking cruel orders and complaining loudly about a tiny water spot on the bathroom mirror, acting as if she were the wealthy lady of the manor. I pulled her aside into the hallway and told her through gritted teeth to stop treating the hard-working cleaners like garbage. She just rolled her eyes, flipped her perfectly styled hair, and said, "Relax, Marlo, you can easily afford it. Stop being so uptight." I was at my absolute breaking point. I cornered my mother in the kitchen and told her that Tamsin needed to leave immediately. I told her that this was my house, my sanctuary, and she was disrespecting it and me. Corinne just let out a long, dramatic sigh, putting on her absolute best wounded mother face. "She is going through a really hard time right now, Marlo. Why do you always have to be so rigid and unforgiving? You have this enormous, beautiful house, and it is mostly empty just for the two of you. Why can't you just open your heart and share your blessings with your own sister? You have so much, and she has so little. It just does not look right to the rest of the family." There was that phrase again. It does not look right. To my mother, it did not look right that the invisible workhorse had a mansion while the beautiful golden child had nothing. In her twisted, toxic arithmetic, the fact that I had worked 18-hour days for years to afford it and Tamsin had literally never held a job for more than a month was completely irrelevant. I had the shiny object. Therefore, Tamsin was naturally owed it to balance the scales. I finally found my spine and put my foot down hard. I gave them all a strict, non-negotiable deadline. 30 days, and they were all out, no excuses. They grumbled, they complained loudly, they called relatives to paint me as the greedy villain of the family, but eventually, they packed up their mountains of luggage and left. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had successfully drawn a boundary and defended my territory. I was so incredibly naive. 2 weeks after they finally moved out, I was sitting in my office, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram on my lunch break. I saw a new post from Tamsin pop up on my feed. It was a picture of her posing seductively by my custom-built infinity pool, holding a crystal glass of champagne, looking out over the manicured lawn. The caption underneath the photo made the blood in my veins run ice cold. "Manifesting my absolute dream life. Moving into my new forever home very soon. Can't wait to host you all. #blessed, #Oakwood Estate, #new beginnings." I stared at the glowing screen, my heart pounding in my chest. My forever home? Moving in soon? I tried to rationalize it. I thought she was just being deeply delusional, faking a lavish lifestyle for the likes and attention of her followers. I showed the post to Beckett when I got home, and we both shook our heads, laughing off her crazy, unhinged entitlement. I had absolutely no idea that while I was sitting there laughing at her pathetic Instagram post, a very real, very legal contract was being quietly and maliciously drafted behind my back. I thought she was just manifesting a fantasy. I didn't know that my own parents were actively manifesting a hostile takeover of everything I owned. The real catalyst, the massive spark that ignited this entire explosive powder keg, happened exactly 1 month before the wedding day. I was up to my neck in suffocating wedding stress. I was drowning in seating charts, trying to balance difficult relatives, arguing with vendors over floral arrangements, and finalizing the expensive catering menu. The stress was physically eating me alive, causing sleepless nights and constant headaches, but I was fiercely determined to have a perfect day to celebrate my love for Beckett. Surprisingly, my parents were playing incredibly nice. They offered to help with minor details, they kept their distance when asked, and they were acting exactly like a normal, supportive, loving family. It was a complete illusion, of course. It was a carefully constructed, masterful smokescreen designed specifically to keep me completely docile, trusting, and unaware of the knife being sharpened for my back. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Beckett was at his architectural firm working late on a big project, and I was sitting alone on the living room floor, surrounded by towering piles of cream-colored wedding invitations, meticulously writing out addresses. My phone buzzed loudly on the glass coffee table, breaking the silence. I picked it up. It was a message from my Aunt Vesper. Vesper is my mother's older sister. For years, she was the absolute only person in the entire extended family who ever looked at how I was treated by Corinne and Alistair and gave me a sympathetic, knowing glance. She was not the type of woman to cause a massive scene at Thanksgiving or intervene directly in the abuse, but she saw the toxic dynamic for exactly what it was. She knew I was the scapegoat. The message she sent me was not a text. It was an audio file. There was no accompanying message, no explanation, no context whatsoever. Just a 2-minute recording sitting in my chat history. My hands slightly shaking with an unknown dread, I pressed play. The audio was a bit muffled at first, sounding exactly like a phone had been left recording on a cafe table or hastily tucked inside a leather purse, but the voices quickly became crystal clear. It was Corinne and Tamsin having lunch together. "You really need to stop posting pictures of the house, Tamsin," my mother's voice hissed through the tiny speaker, sounding irritated. "You are going to completely spook her before we are ready to make our move." "But it is taking way too long," Tamsin whined, the grating, nasal pitch of her voice making my jaw clench involuntarily. "My landlord is threatening to evict me next week. You promised me I would have the keys to the mansion by the summer. I have already started buying furniture for the patio. I am handling it, be patient," Corinne snapped back sharply. "We have the transfer deed already drafted by a lawyer. I am going to bring it directly to the bridal suite right before the ceremony begins. We will corner her in there. She will be in her expensive dress, her makeup will be perfectly done, and she will be way too terrified of making a scene and ruining her perfect day to fight back. You know exactly how she is. She will just swallow her pride and sign it to keep the peace. She always does. It is her nature." My heart literally stopped beating for a second. I sat frozen on the thick rug, the expensive wedding invitations completely forgotten, scattered around me like garbage. "What if she actually says no this time?" Tamsin asked, sounding genuinely skeptical. "What if she calls Beckett in to defend her?" "She will not," my mother said. Her voice was dripping with absolute, terrifying, cold-blooded confidence. "And if she tries to refuse or play tough, your father and I have the ultimate leverage. We will tell her that if she does not sign the house over to you right then and there, we will walk out of that room, go straight to the police, and tell them she embezzled the missing funds from the logistics company." "Missing funds?" Tamsin asked, her voice dipping in confusion. "What funds?" "The $450,000, Corinne replied casually, as if she were discussing the price of groceries. "Alistair's company is completely drowning in debt. He cooked the books to cover all the cash we pulled out for your international trips and the house renovations last year. Marlo set up the accounting software for him 8 years ago. Her digital footprint and admin codes are all over the legacy system. We will simply tell the authorities and all her little high society real estate friends that she drained the family business to secretly fund her lavish lifestyle and buy that mansion. It is her word against ours. She will sign the house over to stay out of a federal prison. I guarantee it." The recording clicked off, leaving behind a deafening silence. I sat there in the vast, echoing space of my beautiful home. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin, like I could not pull enough oxygen into my lungs. My hands were shaking so violently that I dropped my phone onto the rug. They were not just trying to emotionally manipulate me anymore. They were not just trying to guilt-trip me into giving up my property to appease the golden child. They were actively plotting to extort me for millions of dollars. They had stolen nearly $500,000 from their own failing business to fund Tamsin's ridiculous luxury lifestyle, and they were planning to frame me for felony embezzlement if I didn't hand over a $2 million asset on the most important day of my life. My own mother and father, the people who brought me into this world, were entirely willing to send me to a federal penitentiary, ruin my career, and destroy my marriage just to protect and enrich their favorite child. I did not cry. There were absolutely no tears left in my body for these people. The sad, pathetic, hopeful little girl inside me who just wanted her parents to love her finally laid down and died permanently on that living room floor. And in her place, something else woke up. Something incredibly cold, razor-sharp, and deeply, terrifyingly ruthless. I did not call Beckett first. I did not want to panic him or drag him into a messy emotional breakdown. Instead, I picked up my phone with a suddenly steady hand, scrolled through my contacts, and dialed a number I had only ever used for extremely high-stakes, multi-million-dollar corporate real estate disputes. The phone rang twice. Holden Law Group, a deep, highly professional, no-nonsense voice answered. "Holden, it is Marlowe," I said. I didn't recognize my own voice. It sounded eerily calm, like a machine. "I need to hire you immediately for a highly sensitive personal matter. It involves blackmail, extortion, massive corporate fraud, and the immediate, total hostile takeover of my family." "I am listening," Holden said, his tone instantly shifting from standard greeting to absolute focus. If you are watching this video and you have ever had to build a literal fortress to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to love you the most, hit the subscribe button right now. Do not ever let anyone tell you that blood is thicker than water when their water is toxic and poisonous. I sat on the floor and told Holden absolutely everything. Every single detail of the past 10 years, every word of the terrifying recording, the exact nature of the software I installed 8 years ago. And when I was finally done speaking, I asked him the single most important question of my entire life. Can we legally destroy them without them seeing it coming? Holden paused for a long moment on the other end of the line. I could hear him typing rapidly on his keyboard. "Marlowe," he finally said, his voice carrying the heavy, metallic weight of a loaded gun. "We are not just going to destroy them. We are going to build a legal trap so tight that they will happily hand us the matches to burn their own empire down." The trap had to be absolutely, flawlessly perfect. If I confronted them immediately, if I started screaming, throwing accusations, and demanding answers, they would instantly scramble like cockroaches in the light. They would systematically destroy the financial records, deny the recording ever existed, claim Aunt Vesper was crazy, and find a way to twist the narrative to make me look like a hysterical, paranoid, stressed-out bride who is losing her mind. I could not afford to fight them with raw emotions. Emotions were their battlefield. I had to fight them with cold, hard paper. For the next 4 weeks leading up to the wedding, I lived a grueling double life. During the day, I was the stressed, ecstatic, glowing bride. I went to final dress fittings with Corinne and Tamsin. I stood on pedestals and let Tamsin make snide, passive-aggressive comments about my choice of bridesmaids' dresses, pretending it didn't bother me. I smiled sweetly and nodded when my mother constantly criticized the floral budget and complained that the venue wasn't grand enough. I played the role of the weak, compliant, desperate for approval daughter flawlessly. I let them believe they were in total, undisputed control of the situation. I watched them exchange smug glances, thinking they had me exactly where they wanted me. But at night, while my family thought I was sound asleep dreaming of wedding cake, Holden and I were aggressively working. Because I had originally set up the internal accounting software for my father's logistics company 8 years ago, I still intimately knew the architecture of the entire system. I didn't need to illegally hack into it, I just needed Holden to use his legal expertise. Holden filed a very quiet, highly specific legal discovery motion under the radar, citing a potential, vague conflict of interest regarding my past involvement with the company's financials to protect my upcoming marital assets. It was a brilliant, stealthy legal maneuver that gave us temporary read-only access to the ledgers. What Holden found in those files was infinitely worse than we could have ever imagined. Alastair had not just pulled out $450,000 in one go. He had systematically, ruthlessly drained the company's operational funds over a period of 2 years. He was dodging massive amounts of federal taxes, stiffing loyal vendors, and falsifying payroll. And where exactly did the money go? Holden, acting like a bloodhound, traced every single wire transfer. It was an absolute bloodbath of arrogant financial stupidity. There were massive, glaring transfers to luxury car dealerships. There were exorbitant payments for first-class airline tickets to Dubai and Paris. There were tens of thousands of dollars spent at high-end designer boutiques in Beverly Hills. Tamsin's massive closet full of Hermes, Prada, and Chanel bags was not funded by a secret, wealthy investor like she claimed. It was funded by blatant federal tax fraud and corporate theft committed by our father. But the most sickening part was the cover-up. My father had deliberately and meticulously routed dozens of the fraudulent internal approval codes through the dormant admin profile I had created in my 20s. He was desperately trying to leave a digital breadcrumb trail that pointed directly, undeniably at me. He was actively framing his own hard-working daughter for federal crimes just to keep his lazy, golden child in luxury shoes. We meticulously documented absolutely everything. Every wire transfer receipt, every IP address login from Alastair's home computer, every completely fraudulent vendor invoice. Holden printed it all out and compiled it into a massive, heavy, damning manila file. We had more than enough concrete evidence to put both Alastair and Tamsin in a federal prison for a very long time, and Corinne right alongside them as a willing accessory to extortion and fraud. "We are fully ready," Holden told me over coffee 3 days before the wedding, tapping the thick manila folder on the table with his index finger. "The trap is set. If they try to pull this extortion stunt on your wedding day, I will be standing right outside the door of the bridal suite. You just give me the signal." The night before the wedding, we held the rehearsal dinner at a beautiful, dimly lit Italian restaurant downtown. The atmosphere at our table was incredibly tense, though I think I was the only person in the room who truly understood why. Towards the end of the meal, my parents stood up to give a toast. The room quieted down. Alastair raised his glass of expensive red wine, looking at me with a warm, loving, sickeningly fake smile that made my stomach aggressively churn. To my beautiful daughter, Marlo, my father boomed, his deep voice carrying easily across the crowded room. "You have always been the absolute rock of this family. We are so incredibly proud of the strong woman you have become, and we know in our hearts that tomorrow, you will do exactly what is right for your future and for the future of all of us." The malicious double meaning behind his words was so thick you could choke on it. He was practically salivating at the thought of the $2 million deed transferring into his golden child's greedy hands. Tamsin was sitting right next to him, sipping her champagne, looking at me with a smug, knowing little smile. She already thought the mansion was hers. She was probably already mentally planning how to redecorate my primary bedroom. I stood up slowly, picking up my own glass. I looked directly at my father, then shifted my gaze to my mother, and finally locked eyes with my sister. I smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying smile that absolutely did not reach my eyes. "Thank you so much, Dad," I said, my voice steady, clear, and ringing with finality. "Tomorrow is going to be a day of absolute truth. I promise you, everything is finally going to end up exactly where it belongs." They all clapped, smiling widely, completely oblivious to the terrifying fact that I had just locked the cage doors around them and thrown away the key. Thank you so much for reading this far. If you are enjoying this story of ultimate family karma, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out, and trust me, you are not going to want to miss what happens when those bridal suite doors open. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, with a crisp breeze that rustled the ancient oak trees surrounding the estate. For the first few hours of the day, I actually allowed myself to forget the impending storm. I sat in the plush velvet chair of the bridal suite, sipping a mimosa while my makeup artist carefully applied my foundation. My bridesmaids, women I had known since college who actually supported and loved me, were laughing and sharing stories. Every time the door opened, a delivery of fresh white roses or a sweet, handwritten note from Beckett would arrive. For a brief, shining window of time, I felt like a normal bride. I felt safe. I felt loved. But as the clock ticked closer to the ceremony, the tension in my chest began to tighten like a coiled spring. I knew my parents were out there. I knew exactly what they were planning. At exactly 10 minutes before I was scheduled to walk down the aisle, the heavy oak door of the suite swung open. My bridesmaids had just left to take their places in the garden. I was entirely alone, standing in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror, doing one final check of my veil. The door clicked shut, and the lock engaged with a heavy, metallic thud. I turned around, and the scene from my nightmare finally materialized. My father, Alistair, moved with surprising speed for a man his size, planting himself firmly in front of the door. He crossed his thick arms, his face set in a grim, immovable skull. My mother, Corinne, stepped forward. And lingering just outside the doorway, visible through the small glass pane, was Tamsin. She had her arms crossed, wearing a smug, victorious half-smile, waiting for her new kingdom to be handed over. Corinne reached into her expensive designer clutch and pulled out a thick, folded document. She tossed it onto the glass vanity table. It landed with a heavy slap next to my bridal bouquet. "Sign it, Marlowe," she said, her voice stripped of any motherly warmth. It was pure, unfiltered ice. I looked down at the document. It was a quitclaim deed. It legally transferred full ownership of the Oakwood estate from my name directly into Tamsin's name, effective immediately. There was a pen resting right beside it. I looked back up at her, maintaining a steady, unwavering gaze. "And if I refuse?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Corinne took a step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her heavy floral perfume was suffocating. "You are not going to refuse," she hissed. "You are going to sign that paper right now. Tamsin needs this house. She is the face of this family. She is the beautiful one, the one who knows how to host, the one who deserves to live in luxury. You are just the family wallet. You always have been. You can just go out and buy another ruined building to fix up. It is what you are good at." I glanced at my father. "Are you really going to let her do this, Dad? On my wedding day?" I asked, giving him one final, pathetic chance to be a decent human being. Alistair did not even blink. "Family requires sacrifice, Marlowe. You have been incredibly selfish lately. It is time to pay your dues. Sign the paper." Corinne leaned in, her eyes wide and manic. "If you do not pick up that pen and sign your name right now, we will walk straight out those doors. We will march up to the altar, take the microphone, and tell your precious Beckett, his wealthy family, and every single one of your high-profile real estate clients that you embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from our logistics company. We will tell them you are a thief and a fraud. Your reputation will be ruined before the string quartet even finishes playing." She stood up straight, a cruel, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "I am going to count to 10, Marlowe. If that paper is not signed by the time I reach 10, your life as you know it is over. 1, 2, 3. I felt a profound, scorching anger ignite in my chest, but I kept my face entirely blank. I looked at the pen. I looked at my mother. I looked at the little girl inside me who had spent 34 years begging for these people to love her. I let her go. "Go ahead," I said calmly. Corinne paused, her smirk faltering. 4, she said, her voice wavering slightly. 5, 6. She was waiting for me to crack. She was waiting for the tears, the begging, the desperate capitulation she had relied on for 3 decades. 7, Alistair growled, taking a threatening step forward. 8. At the exact moment my father formed the word 8, the heavy oak door did not just open. It was shoved inward with such forceful authority that Alistair had to stumble backward to avoid being hit. The door swung wide open, revealing the hallway. Tamsin gasped and jumped out of the way. Standing in the doorway, dressed in an immaculate, razor-sharp gray suit, holding a massive manila folder, was Holden. The atmosphere in the room shifted so violently it felt like the air pressure had dropped. Holden did not look like a wedding guest. He did not have a boutonniere pinned to his lapel, and he was not wearing a polite, festive smile. He looked exactly like what he was, a ruthless, high-powered corporate litigator stepping onto a battlefield he had already conquered. "Who the hell are you?" Alistair barked, recovering his balance and puffing up his chest. "This is a private family moment. Get out of here before I have security throw you off the property." Holden ignored him entirely. He walked into the bridal suite with slow, measured steps, his expensive leather shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. He walked straight past my father, straight past my mother, and stopped directly in front of the vanity table. He looked down at the quitclaim deed Corinne had thrown on the glass. With a look of profound disgust, Holden picked up the deed, folded it in half, and tossed it into the small wastebasket under the table. In its place, he set down the thick, heavy manila folder he had been carrying. It landed with a thud that echoed in the quiet room. "My name is Holden," he said, his voice deep, resonant, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I am the senior partner at Holden Law Group. I represent Marlowe in all personal and corporate legal matters. And if you take one more aggressive step toward my client, Alistair, I will personally ensure you leave this venue in the back of a police cruiser." Alistair stopped dead in his tracks, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You have no right to be here. She stole from our company. We are giving her a chance to make it right." Holden slowly turned his head to look at my father. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He simply adjusted his glasses and spoke with lethal, chilling precision. "Nobody stole from your company, Alistair," Holden said smoothly. "Except for you." Corinne's face, previously flushed with the thrill of her extortion attempt, instantly drained of all color. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. She took a step back, her eyes starting nervously between Holden, the folder on the table, and me. "I do not know what lies she has been feeding you," Alistair stammered, though his voice lacked its previous booming confidence. "But she is a liar. She set up our accounting software. She drained the accounts." Holden reached out and casually flipped open the cover of the manila folder. He spread out the first few pages on the glass table. They were crisp, clear, undeniable bank statements and wire transfer logs. "You really should have hired a better accountant if you were going to attempt federal tax fraud," Holden remarked dryly. "We have spent the last 4 weeks conducting a full, legal forensic audit of your logistics company's ledgers. We traced every single missing dollar. All 450,000 of them." He pointed to a highlighted line on the top page. $50,000 wired directly to a luxury car dealership in December to purchase a Range Rover. "A vehicle currently registered in your name, Alistair." He flipped to the next page. $25,000 wired to a travel agency for first-class flights and luxury villa rentals in Dubai. "Booked under your name, Corinne." He flipped one more page, tapping his finger against a massive column of numbers. "And over $100,000 spent over the course of 2 years at various high-end designer boutiques, jewelry stores, and luxury spas. All authorized by credit cards linked directly to the corporate operational fund, signed for by your youngest daughter, Tamsin." Holden looked up, his gaze sweeping over my parents like they were insects on a microscope slide. "You did not just steal from your own vendors and evade federal taxes. You deliberately routed the fraudulent approval codes through a dormant admin profile Marlowe created 8 years ago, actively attempting to frame your own daughter for your financial crimes. That elevates this from simple corporate fraud to malicious extortion and conspiracy." The silence in the bridal suite was absolute. The string quartet outside was still playing a beautiful, sweeping melody, but inside that room, the world had entirely stopped spinning. Tamsin, who had crept into the room behind Holden to see what was happening, let out a loud, dramatic gasp. She covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with panic as she stared at the highlighted bank statements bearing her name. "He is lying!" Tamsin shrieked, her voice shattering the silence like broken glass. She pointed a trembling finger at Holden, tears instantly springing to her eyes. She always cried when she was backed into a corner. Mom, Dad, tell him he is lying. Marlo made those papers up. She is trying to ruin my life because she has always been jealous of me. Holden let out a short, humorless laugh. Jealous of you? He asked, looking Tamsin up and down with clinical detachment. Marlo built a $2 million empire with her bare hands. You bought a closet full of Hermes bags with stolen money. There is nothing here to be jealous of. Alistair lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of pure, desperate rage. He reached for the glass table, his thick hands grasping at the manila folder, intent on ripping the documents to shreds. I did not flinch. Holden did not even move to stop him. Go ahead and tear them up, Alistair, Holden said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. Rip them into tiny pieces. Eat them if it makes you feel better. I have 5 physical copies of that exact file locked in my office safe. I have digital backups on 3 separate encrypted servers. Holden paused, letting the reality of the situation sink in before delivering the final, fatal blow. And more importantly, a fully authenticated copy of that exact file was placed directly onto the desk of a senior investigator at the Internal Revenue Service at 8 o'clock this morning. The color vanished entirely from Alistair's face. The heavy folder slipped from his trembling fingers, spilling the damning financial records all over the floor. He stumbled backward, hitting the wall, his chest heaving as he struggled to breathe. The IRS. Those 3 letters held more terror for a fraudulent business owner than a loaded weapon. Corinne collapsed into one of the velvet chairs, her hands shaking so violently her clutch fell to the floor, spilling expensive lipstick and mints across the rug. Marlo, she whispered, her voice cracking, sounding frail and old for the very first time in my life. Marlo, please. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. We gave you life. I stepped forward, my heavy silk train gliding behind me. I looked down at my mother, feeling nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. The invisible chains I had dragged around for 34 years had finally snapped. Do you really want to talk about family right now? I asked, keeping my voice incredibly soft. 10 minutes ago, you cornered me in this room. You threw a legal document in my face and told me you were going to ruin my reputation, destroy my career, and humiliate me in front of my new husband if I did not hand over the house I bled to build. You were fully prepared to send me to a federal prison to protect Tamsin's shopping habits. I leaned down slightly, bringing my face closer to hers. You wanted to go out to the garden and tell everyone I am a thief? I offered. We can still do that. We can walk out those doors right now. I will hand you the microphone, and you can read every single one of these fraudulent transactions to the 200 guests sitting on the lawn. Let us see who they think the real thief is. Corinne squeezed her eyes shut, tears finally spilling over her heavily powdered cheeks. No, she sobbed. Please no. Do not do this. Tamsin was weeping loudly in the corner, clutching her expensive dress, realizing for the first time in her pampered life that there was a massive mess her parents could not simply sweep under the rug for her. The power in the room had shifted entirely. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the family wallet. I was the executioner, and I was holding the axe. I stood up straight, looking at the 3 pathetic figures cowering in my bridal suite. Here is exactly what is going to happen, I said, my voice ringing with absolute, unyielding authority. There will be no negotiations. There will be no family meetings to discuss this. You will listen to my terms, and you will obey them, or Holden makes a phone call to the federal prosecutor's office right now. Alistair nodded weakly, his eyes fixed on the floor. First, I said, pointing at the wastebasket where Holden had thrown the quitclaim deed. You will never, ever mention the Oakwood estate again. You will sign a legally binding waiver relinquishing any and all fabricated claims to my property, my business, or my personal assets. Second, I continued, turning my gaze to Tamsin, who shrank back against the wall. You have exactly 24 hours to go to my house, pack up whatever cheap junk you left in my guest room, and get off my property. If you leave a single item behind, it goes into the dumpster. If you damage a single wall while moving out, I will press criminal vandalism charges. Finally, I looked back at Corinne. You are going to walk out the back door of this venue right now. You will not speak to any of the guests. You will not cause a scene. You will quietly get into your car and drive away. You are no longer invited to this wedding. You are no longer a part of my life. If you ever attempt to contact me, Beckett, or any of my future children, Holden will file a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin. But I am your mother. Corinne wailed, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. You cannot banish me from your wedding. What will people say? How will it look? Even now, even in the face of total ruin, she only cared about how it looked. At that exact moment, the door to the suite pushed open again. It was Beckett. He was in his tailored black tuxedo, looking incredibly handsome, but his face was tight with worry. He had heard the shouting from the hallway. Marlo? He asked, stepping into the room and immediately moving to stand by my side, wrapping a protective arm around my waist. Is everything okay? Tamsin saw Beckett and instantly went into her default survival mode. She threw herself forward, crying hysterically, reaching out for him. Beckett, please. She sobbed, playing the ultimate victim. Look at how she is treating her own family. She is being a monster. She is throwing our parents out of the wedding. Please, you have to talk some sense into her. Beckett did not even flinch. He looked at Tamsin with a level of cold, profound disgust that made her freeze in her tracks. He tightened his grip on my waist. Tamsin, Beckett said, his voice low and firm. I am the one who told Marlo to hire Holden. I am the one who told her to hand the files over to the authorities. You people are a cancer. You should go pack your bags. Tamsin's mouth dropped open in shock. Her final lifeline had just been brutally cut. Holden checked his expensive wristwatch. You have 3 minutes to exit the premises before I call the local authorities to escort you out for trespassing, he stated clinically. My parents slowly stood up. They looked broken, aged a decade in the span of 10 minutes. Alistair did not say a word. He just turned and shuffled toward the back exit of the suite, the door that led to the parking lot rather than the garden. Corinne followed him, her shoulders slumped, her expensive green gown suddenly looking ridiculous and out of place. Tamsin scrambled after them, her face stained with black mascara, looking back at me one last time with a mixture of pure hatred and genuine terror. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. The room was suddenly incredibly quiet, save for the faint, beautiful music drifting in from the garden. I took a deep breath, feeling a massive, crushing weight lift off my chest. I looked at Beckett. He smiled, reaching up to gently wipe a stray tear from my cheek. Are you ready to get married? He asked softly. I looked in the mirror one last time. The scared little girl was gone forever. The strong, wealthy, independent woman staring back at me was finally free. I am more than ready, I said. The wedding ceremony was delayed by exactly 15 minutes. When the coordinator finally gave the signal, the string quartet shifted into the processional march. I did not have my father to walk me down the aisle. I did not want him there. Instead, the wooden doors opened, and I stepped out onto the pristine white runner entirely on my own. The sun was shining. The garden smelled of blooming jasmine and fresh earth. As I walked past the rows of wooden chairs, I saw the confused whispers of a few relatives wondering where my parents were, but I did not care. I held my head high, my bouquet steady in my hands, a massive, genuine smile radiating from my face. As I passed the third row, my Aunt Vesper caught my eye. She gave me a small, knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement of the war I had just fought and won behind closed doors. Beckett was waiting for me under the floral arch, tears shining in his eyes. When I reached him, he took both of my hands in his, grounding me. We said our vows surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated us. There was no toxic drama, no passive-aggressive comments, no hovering shadows of manipulation. It was pure, unadulterated freedom. The reception was a spectacular party. We danced, we drank champagne, and we celebrated until the stars came out. If anyone asked about my parents' sudden disappearance, Beckett simply smiled politely and said there had been a minor family emergency that required their immediate attention. Nobody pushed the issue. Of course, the silence from my family was only temporary. The fallout arrived the very next morning. Beckett and I were sitting in the airport lounge, waiting to board our flight for our honeymoon in Greece. I turned on my phone, and it immediately exploded with notifications. My mother had spent the entire night calling every single relative in our extended family, spinning a frantic, hysterical narrative. According to Corinne's new story, I had suffered a massive bridal breakdown. I had gone crazy with wedding stress, screamed at them in the bridal suite, completely lost my mind, and cruelly banished them from the venue for absolutely no reason. She played the weeping, heartbroken mother perfectly. I had dozens of text messages from cousins, aunts, and uncles. They called me an ungrateful brat. They called me a monster. They demanded I apologize to my grieving parents immediately. They were the classic flying monkeys, manipulated perfectly by the narcissist to attack the scapegoat. I sat in the airport lounge, sipping my coffee, reading the vitriolic messages. I didn't feel anxious. I just felt tired of the relentless games. I opened the massive family group chat, which currently had over 30 people actively typing and sending angry emojis. I did not write a long, emotional paragraph defending myself. I did not try to argue with their feelings. Instead, I typed a single, simple sentence. For anyone wondering why my parents were escorted out of my wedding, please review the attached document before sending me another message. Below the text, I attached a condensed, redacted PDF file. It contained the irrefutable evidence. It had the audio transcript of Corinne and Tamsin plotting to extort me for the house. It had a few clear screenshots of the bank transfers showing Alistair draining the company accounts to buy Tamsin's designer bags. It was cold, hard, indisputable reality. I hit send. Then, I put my phone on airplane mode, took Beckett's hand, and walked onto the plane to start my new life. When we landed in Athens 12 hours later, I turned my phone back on. The family group chat was completely, utterly dead. The flying monkeys had been silenced. You cannot argue with bank statements. You cannot gaslight a wire transfer. Several cousins had privately messaged me, apologizing profusely for jumping to conclusions. Aunt Vesper left a voicemail simply saying, "I am so incredibly proud of you, Marlo." The cleanup crew had officially resigned. The family was finally forced to look at the ugly, rotting foundation they had built their lives upon, and I was no longer standing there holding the walls up for them. It has been exactly 6 months since the wedding. Reality, unlike my mother, does not care about optics or carefully crafted family narratives. Reality is entirely undefeated. The Internal Revenue Service did exactly what Holden promised they would do. They descended upon my father's logistics company like a swarm of locusts. When the federal auditors finished reviewing the cooked books, the financial penalties and back taxes were astronomical. Alistair was forced to completely liquidate the business just to keep himself out of a federal prison cell. But liquidating the business was not enough to cover the massive debt. My parents were forced to sell their comfortable suburban home at a significant loss to pay off the remaining fines. They currently live in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the undesirable side of town. The wealthy, respectable facade my mother spent her entire life meticulously polishing has been utterly shattered. She no longer attends her high society luncheons. She no longer brags about her successful daughters. And what about Tamsin, the beautiful, delicate golden child? Without the massive flow of stolen money, and without the family wallet to bail her out, reality hit her like a freight train. She was evicted from her luxury apartment because she could not pay the rent. Her closet full of designer bags had to be sold on consignment websites just to buy groceries. Last week, a friend of mine sent me a photo. It was Tamsin. She is currently working 30 hours a week as a waitress at a noisy, mid-tier chain restaurant downtown. She was wearing an ugly, polyester uniform, carrying a massive tray of dirty dishes, looking exhausted and profoundly miserable. She is finally learning at 31 years old what I had to learn at 24. Rent is a real number. The bills come due whether you are crying or not, and nobody is coming to save you. I did not feel a sense of manic triumph when I saw that photo. I did not laugh. I just felt a quiet, somber validation. I had shielded her from the harsh realities of the world for far too long, and my shielding had never been a kindness. It was the exact thing that kept her entirely helpless. The most generous thing I ever did for my sister was stopping the cash flow. As for me, my life has never been better. Beckett and I are incredibly happy. The Oakwood estate is fully finished, and last month, our gorgeous mansion was featured on the cover of a prestigious national architectural magazine. I sat on my custom patio, drinking my morning coffee, looking at the glossy pages featuring my beautiful home, the home nobody could ever take away from me. My real estate firm is booming. I am respected, I am successful, and most importantly, I am surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not just for what I can provide for them. I have not spoken a single word to my parents or my sister since the moment the heavy door of the bridal suite clicked shut behind them. There were no tearful apologies. There was no dramatic reconciliation where they finally saw the error of their ways. Toxic people rarely have sudden epiphanies. They just find new victims to drain. But lately, some of the older, more traditional relatives in my family have started whispering again. They have been sending me gentle, probing messages. They tell me that Alistair's health is failing due to the stress. They tell me Corinne is deeply depressed. They say that family is family, that blood is a bond you cannot break, and that I should be the bigger person. They want me to reach out, to show mercy, to maybe help them out with their rent now that I am doing so incredibly well. They want the family wallet to open back up, just a little bit. So, I am leaving this in your hands. You have heard the entire story. You have seen the receipts. You know exactly what they plan to do to me on the happiest day of my life. They are begging for mercy now that their empire has burned to the ground. According to the extended family, I am being cold and ruthless for letting my own parents suffer in a tiny apartment while I live in a $2 million mansion. So tell me, am I wrong? Should I show mercy to the people who plan to extort me and throw me in a federal prison just because we share the same blood? Or should I let them lay in the bed they so carefully made? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story of absolute, undeniable karma. Thank you for listening, and remember, you do not have to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm.